In the summer of 1403, a rebellion broke out in England that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. There was only one way to resolve it: battle.
In these fields, north of Shrewsbury, two English armies met. One royal, led in part by a young Prince Hal. One rebel, led by Henry Percy, known as Hotspur. At the Battle of Shrewsbury, England's future was decided.
To find out more about this astonishing fight, we're splitting up. I'm Professor Michael Livingston, and I'm heading north to find out about the rebellious Hotspur who wanted to seize the crown.
And I'm Dan Jones. I'll be following in the footsteps of the young Prince Hal, discovering how this terrible battle moulded him to become one of the greatest royal leaders in English history.
The Battle of Shrewsbury brought England to a crossroads. Victory for the royals would secure the new Lancastrian dynasty and clear the path for Hal to inherit the crown.
But if they were defeated, England would change forever.
My journey following Hal to Shrewsbury starts here, just like his, in Westminster, 4 years before the battle. It was here in September 1399, in the magnificent Westminster Hall, that his father, Henry Bolingbroke, made one of the most audacious claims to the English throne in history.
Henry Bolingbroke is one of England's leading nobles. He's been in exile, but now he's returned. He's cornered and captured his cousin, King Richard II, and he's come here to London to address Parliament. He tells them Richard has agreed to give up the crown and that he, Henry, is ready to take on the mantle as a new King of England.
Just 2 weeks later, on the 13th of October 1399, the deal was done, and Henry Bolingbroke was crowned King Henry IV. Alongside him was his son, Hal, invested as the new Prince of Wales. The Lancastrian dynasty finally had their hands on the crown, but the kingdom was bitterly divided. If the regime was to survive, Hal would need to grow up fast. But when we talk about Hal's teenage years, it's impossible to ignore the looming presence of one man who, strangely enough, was born almost 150 years after Hal died. Shakespeare.
In Shakespeare's version, young Hal wasn't interested in politics and the court. He wanted to be out with his best mate Falstaff, drinking and chasing girls at the Old Boar's Head on Eastcheap. And it's Shakespeare's version of Hal that still comes to mind when we think of him today.
Of course, Tudor fiction didn't quite match the medieval reality. Numerous plots to topple Henry from his new throne were being concocted, and young Hal was key in helping to protect it.
But soon, an even greater threat would loom over the kingdom, one that would overshadow the Welsh, the Scottish, and even the French. It would come from much closer to home, and if it wasn't dealt with, the very future of the Lancastrian dynasty could be at stake.
But while Dan is rubbing shoulders with royalty in Westminster, I'm in Northumberland, almost as far away from London as you can get in England. This is Percy country.
Since the time of the Conqueror, the power of the Percy family had ebbed and flowed. But throughout the 1300s, they were in their ascendancy, first finding favor under Edward III and then under Richard II. But forever looking for a way to bolster their power even further, they threw in their lot with Henry Bolingbroke and helped him seize power in 1399. They were no longer simply a powerful family in the north. They were kingmakers.
The head of the family was Henry Percy, the first Earl of Northumberland, but by 1399 he was almost 60. The beating heart of the Percys was now his firstborn son, also named, you guessed it, Henry.
Henry quickly became acquainted with war. He fought in campaigns alongside Edward III and Richard II. His enemies, seeing his swiftness towards battle, the enthusiasm with which he approached it, quickly gave him a new name, Hotspur.
For Hotspur and his father, this was home, the imposing Warkworth Castle. The enormous keep you see here today was built by Henry Sr. in 1377, and the castle is dripping in Percy family insignia. The message was clear. Henry Bolingbroke may have been the king, but the Percys were the rulers of the north.
The Percys were lavished with money, titles, and lands by the new king. Keepers of the border with Scotland, attackers of the Welsh, they were the peacekeepers in a new kingdom. And Henry Hotspur was an energetic leader. But the good times were not to last.
The Percys, in the far-flung north, began to feel disgruntled. The once blossoming relationship between the crown and its loyal enforcer was quickly left in tatters as Henry IV flexed his royal power. Hotspur was left wondering if he might not make a better king himself. In October 1402, Henry IV called a parliament. Hotspur left Northumberland and headed south. Finally, the two men would meet face to face. It was a chance to bury the hatchet and reaffirm the strong bond between the two families. But that's not quite how it turned out.
We'll never know exactly what the two men said to one another. But one thing is for certain. When Hotspur rode north, he had one thing on his mind: rebellion.
In 1403, Shrewsbury was a bustling medieval town. It was an important transport hub, connected to London by the old Roman road Watling Street, and also a centre for the lucrative wool trade from Wales.
It meant that Shrewsbury was both critical to the royal cause and the perfect place to strike as a rebel.
After that disastrous parliament in October 1402, the Percys were going to oust the King of England. Now they made a plan.
Hotspur would head south, rallying an army on his way. Once assembled, he would march on Shrewsbury. On the 9th of July, 1403, the flag of rebellion was raised in Chester. For Hotspur, there was now no turning back.
But little did Hotspur know that despite his plan, the king was about to throw a rather large spanner in the works.
Henry had spent the first part of the year in London, and he decided to throw out an olive branch to the Percy family. He'd gathered together 1,000 men and decided to march them north to help the Percys with what should have been a routine summer of campaigning against the Scots. So quite by chance, just as Hotspur was stirring up rebellion in Chester, Henry was heading north with an army of his own.
On the 12th of July, Henry arrived in Leicester and was brought news of Hotspur's rebellion. He understood the threat immediately. Less than 4 years previously, he'd been the one in Hotspur's shoes and ended up with the crown. Failed to react, and he might be on the wrong side of history repeating itself.
For the next 9 days, the three forces under Hotspur, Hal, and Henry raced for Shrewsbury. On the 19th of July, Hotspur's men arrived at the town, but to their horror, found that Hal's flag was already flying above the castle.
To make matters worse, the next day, to the east of town, Henry IV's royal army appeared on the horizon.
Taken aback by the swift arrival of the king, Hotspur ordered his 5,000-strong army to retreat to the north of town and make camp.
The king also retired. The combined royal force now numbered around 7,000. The stage was set. The next day, the 21st of July, 1403, they would do battle.
So Mike, here we are actually finally on the battlefield itself.
This is it. We've watched these armies get closer and closer and closer, and this is where it's going to happen.
Not quite within spitting distance, but they're certainly within insult shouting distance.
Yeah, we're going to be having shouts go back and forth because the lines are so close at this point.
Let's talk about how the two armies are arranged. Where we're standing now is where your boys, Hotspur and the Cheshire Archers and such like, they're in a row just here, aren't they?
Yeah, it's sort of an arching position across this ridge line. This would have been Hotspur's position. It's good high ground, and he's anticipating the king coming up against him, as happens right here in front of us.
It's funny because standing here now, it doesn't look or feel particularly high. There's just this gentle slope away to the south, but actually any high ground is good ground, right?
That's 100% correct. Anything we can get, and even this slight elevation change, that's going to add percentages to how far those arrows can go when he looses them. And it's that much further to climb up, right?
All about those marginal gains, I suppose.
Any kind of percentage gain we can get is going to help in the fight. And that's where your boy is, down there.
We've got the king in the centre, probably where that tree line is, where the power lines are running. Stafford on the king's right, and then over here, the king's left, that's Hal. 16 years old, in charge of a whole division of the army. That's quite a weight of responsibility to weigh on the shoulders of a teenager.
Ton of pressure.
Let's talk a little bit about the composition of these two armies. We don't know numbers very exactly, of course. At the core of both of them would have been men-at-arms, what we think of as knights in shining armour, swords, daggers. This is the core of both the armies, isn't it?
They are going to be the core power units, especially going to be gathered around the prince, the king. On this side, Hotspur. You're going to have those guys ready with all of their glorious banners of their own, their coats of arms, declaring themselves on the battlefield, and all of them kitted up for the fight.
Actually, the majority of both armies wouldn't have been knights or men-at-arms, would it? It would have been archers. Archers in the 14th century into the early 15th century have traditionally been the kind of secret weapon of English armies overseas, right? If we think about the Battle of Crecy, where they're kind of massacring the French. But this is English archer on English archer.
It's one of the things that's so fascinating about this, because over on the continent for a couple generations now, this has been such a superpower in multiple engagements. But here, it isn't just one side that has it. Both sides have those archers. So what's going to be the difference maker? Well, Hotspur's counting on this high ground being that difference maker. We both got it, but I get to hit you first because I'll have better range.
I'm a bit nervous just thinking about it.
I wouldn't want to be here, I'll tell you that. No. That archery, the longbow, that is what this battle's about.
Clearly, the longbow was going to play a huge role in the Battle of Shrewsbury. So I want to get to grips with why it was such a deadly weapon on the medieval battlefield. I'm meeting Nigel Packwood. He's been shooting longbows for 15 years, and he's going to tell me more.
Oh, wow. Got him. Yeah. We've all heard about the longbow, Nigel. Agincourt, Crecy, Poitiers, these very famous victories of the English over the French. What makes this weapon so special?
It's the power of the bow, but it's not just the bow. You need the archer to be able to draw a powerful bow, and the powerful bow is needed to shoot a heavy projectile, a heavy arrow. And the heavy arrow is required to defeat basic armour, sort of like quilted linen, which was a common sort of armour in the day. So the three together form a weapon system.
Whoa. Looks like tough work. And can I have a go on your bow?
By all means.
Do you let other people touch it?
Yeah, a few.
So what am I doing? Feet offset?
You want your left foot in front so that the balls of your right foot are in line with the heel of your left foot.
Okay.
That will allow you to lean forward slightly at the hip and take the weight onto your knee. you'll never see an image of a medieval archer standing up straight.
So it's the opposite of a boxing stance.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
actually,
almost like
okay.
a forward martial arts stance. So I would start with hands above the eye level, pull the string back as if you're pulling over your ear. Don't pull in a straight line,
Round the back of the ear.
and then draw back until your thumb touches your shoulder.
Whoa. I mean, even though I know it's the back that you've got to be working, everything's going through the shoulder. It's just incredibly hard work. How many arrows do you think a typical longbowman could shoot per minute at a battle like Shrewsbury?
With my experience, I would say about 6 to 8 a minute.
Okay.
I think once they were given the command to shoot, they'd start shooting.
Right.
And they would shoot at their own pace. The net result would be thousands of arrows in the air at one time, all landing into a concentrated area.
All at once. That's a pretty terrifying thought.
Scary stuff. Yeah, you can't see them coming, you can't hear them coming.
My thanks.
With the two armies now arrayed in the summer sun, it must have been an awesome sight. Banners flying high, the sunlight flashing off armor and sword. But before the men were ordered forward and arrows were loosed, there was time for one last moment of peace. If it failed, all hell would break out.
So there's one more thing to do before the fighting starts, and that's send envoys and try and negotiate peace. Possibly. Maybe.
At least, right? We're going to talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's see. Are we going to do this? Are we not going to do this? And this is a very delicate thing. You see this before a lot of battles, right? Are we going to actually fight or not? Offers start getting made.
Right. So there are lots of stories about what the envoys between the king and Hotspur say, and there's a suggestion that the king is offering all sorts of weird and wonderful things like, I'll go back to Parliament and reaffirm my right to rule, or you and me can have a fight, Hotspur, and spare the lives of all of these men around us. Can we really believe any of these stories from the Chronicles?
These kind of discussions are pretty common. Whether or not they really mean it or are just trying to sort of do this for show, right? You know, show that I tried to make an offer and, well, we had to go kill them. You want to have that kind of excuse, if you will.
Or it could be about buying time, right?
It can also be about buying time for both sides, and both sides are fearful of that. At this moment, things are fairly balanced. And the king has got to worry if Hotspur gets more reinforcements from the north. I'm outshot, I'm outgunned, I'm in trouble. On the other side, Hotspur's got to be worried, thinking, well, you know, if more men show up to help the king, I'm in trouble. So the idea of this being a delay is a concern on both sides. We want to talk, but we don't want to give the other side a chance to be in a better position than they are now.
After hours of sending envoys back and forth, unsurprisingly, no peaceful resolution was found. But the day was now well into the afternoon. It was time for the talking to stop and for battle to commence.
So at this point, my boys up here are not going to move. We got the high ground, man. What do you got to do?
Well, there's only one thing to do. The king's men have to start moving up the hill, and that means effectively walking into a hail of arrow shot.
It had to be a sight to see, right? All of these archers loosing whatever they can. We have to remember this is not a designated sort of campaign. We didn't have weeks and weeks of preparation to have barrels of arrows. These guys have scrounged up what they can on the way to this site, and they're bringing it down.
It's not like the king's men wouldn't be shooting back, right? They would be moving, shooting, and that is a lot more difficult than being planted on high ground. This is really advantage Hotspur, strong disadvantage to the king. We have this very poetic description from the great chronicler Thomas Walsingham of men falling like autumn leaves, which sounds almost balletic, but the reality would be horrible. Right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful image for an absolutely horrible thing. It's describing the idea of them falling en masse, and Hotspur's got to be feeling very good.
Well, he's got to be feeling very good because the storm of arrows has the desired effect. You've got Stafford over there on the king's right. His men start to crumble.
Stafford's line, his banner shakes and starts leaving. So you get that entire royal wing begin to withdraw, and that's where the real danger hits. Because once one part of the line starts to leave,
everything else starts to wobble as well.
Everything else starts to wobble because now the King's Center thinks, are we safe? Our flank is now opened up. They're leaving. Should we leave? We don't know. Hotspur sees his chance. Huge cry, Espérance percée. We go running down. We're going to turn this into a rout, and your boys are going to get it in the back.
It's on.
It's on.
When the two lines crashed into one another, the Battle of Shrewsbury descended into ugly hand-to-hand fighting.
There was no love lost between the two armies. One royal, one rebel. Defeat would mean almost certain death.
Victory would mean the crown. Michael and I have headed down the slope, following the charge of Hotspur's men.
It was down here that the battle would be won and lost.
So we're standing now where the worst of the carnage happened.
Yeah, our best guess for where that happens, where we are right now. We were up there, and now those forces are coming downhill.
So all of Hotspur's guys are piling down towards the king in the centre. Now that looks very bad for King Henry IV.
This is a great move by Hotspur. He knows that side of the king's army's folded back. They're going to go into rout. If I get this to push back, I lop the head off the kingdom and I win.
So there's this stream of men, but this far side of the field is Hal, 16 years old, in charge of a third of the army, able to swing round and slam into the side of Hotspur's men as they stream down the hill.
Correct. It's a brilliant moment, what we call command and control. Not only to recognize there is an opening, but in that split moment, decide, here's how I'm going to take advantage of it, and manage to get the entire line to do that, right? I mean, imagine somebody running down this slope. That's the amount of time that Hal has to recognize, this is what's happening, here's what I should do, puts it into action, and it happens. He turns his line, comes flowing across this slope, right into this awful melee. And you can't imagine the horror that took place on this ground as a result.
And it's really just a sea of blood and carnage and chaos and the worst horrors of medieval battle.
And you don't know friend from foe to some degree, right? Once these lines start collapsing, they're all Englishmen, they're all screaming in the same language.
Yes.
It must have been awful. And even though the lines are lines at the beginning, when they collapse into one another, it's just a mix. You take one step and you're, who knows what direction you're facing. The bloodbath was extraordinary. And then that bloodbath continues moving the battle forward.
But in the middle of the maelstrom of steel and blood, the battle and English history reached a huge turning point. In the melee, Hal, the Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne, was struck in the face with an arrow.
We've already got a picture of Hal as playing a really critical role in this battle, but what's even more remarkable for me is that he does so while having suffered a very serious injury. I mean, we don't know exactly when he suffers it, but he gets an arrow in the face.
Just a horrific injury. Amazing he was not killed outright.
This is really a demonstration of his incredible personal fortitude.
I think in the moment he doesn't know exactly what has happened. He pulls the arrow shaft out and shaft comes out. Oh God, I'll keep going. It's only later that it becomes a problem.
This is a really, really pivotal moment of the battle. You know, you almost lose the heir to the throne, the second most important person in the royal lines. Very serious injury, and yet here he is, still with the presence of mind to order his men around, to stay involved in the battle. I think we're building up a picture of a man who, even at 16 years old, is someone pretty serious.
Yeah, he knows what it's going to mean if his banner withdraws from this field. Stafford's banner is gone. If that banner goes, his father's alone. It's over.
Of course, the killing of Hal would have been a great prize for the rebels. But in the press of battle, Hotspur had eyes for only one man, the king.
So the key to the battle remains the king, and Hotspur and the king are getting closer and closer together.
They are. I mean, the banners are still up. You still know your target. And even though Hotspur is getting smashed, right, from this side of this flanking attack on him, he's still got several thousand men, and they still are trying to plow forward and reach that banner.
And things are not going so well for the king. Stafford's cut down. Henry's standard bearer is cut down.
Supposedly he goes down. Now that's a problem, but standards falling down, panic has got to be that close to setting in.
And if the king's standard bearer really does fall in battle, that means that the rebels are within spitting distance of Henry IV. I mean, this is an absolutely critical point. They're at the moment where they could genuinely take down the King of England.
Or from the royalist side, vice versa. We could genuinely take down Hotspur. At this point, one of these men is going to die on this day. It's just a question of who.
And it was in this press that the battle entered its final phase.
We don't know exactly how it happened, but our best sources tell us that Hotspur, blinkered by his desire to kill the king, pushed hard and, in the mess of battle, found himself isolated and surrounded by royalists.
Hotspur might have been a fine knight, but alone he stood little chance. The royalists seized the opportunity, and the arch-rebel Henry Hotspur Percy was cut to pieces on the field at Shrewsbury.
The loss of Hotspur, the figurehead of the rebellion, meant that it was all over for the rebel army. Word of it scorched through the lines like wildfire. Those who could turned and fled the field in a rout.
So Hotspur's dead, and now comes the most dangerous bit of any battle, the rout.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing. We think of that initial clash, the arms on the battlefield, that's where most of the deaths happen, and certainly plenty of people die there. Most of them are dying, however, on the run away from battle, the rout. You're getting it in the back as you're trying to escape after the lines have been broken.
And people are just hurtling pell-mell, any direction they can, down paths like this, over hedgerows, whatever you've got to do. On the losing side, get away from that battlefield, otherwise you're going to be run through.
Yeah, you're going to be cut down. And it is. You move away from danger, right? This is just instinct. Probably a lot are going to be coming in this direction that we're moving because Hal's rush from that side has pushed things this way. But it would just be a moving massacre across these fields as men tried to get away and were run down.
And there's no quarter given, there are no captives taken because it's a civil war and,
Yeah.
you know, this is vicious stuff.
Yeah, who are you going to sell these people to? Yourself? You can't do that. So, yeah, there's no ransom. This isn't, I'm going to capture somebody, sell them back to the French king. This is a traitor. It's a rebel to our common cause, to our kingdom. Absolute slaughter.
The casualty numbers were terrible on both sides. Some accounts suggest that more than 1,500 royalists lay dead.
Hotspur's army lost even more.
But at the end of the day, the king remained alive and kept his hands on the crown.
But the fate of the kingdom still lay in the balance. Prince Hal had made it off the field, alive, but seriously wounded.
Yeah, just the thought of that injury is making me feel a bit queasy. Michael, maybe you should take this one.
The man tasked with saving the prince's life was royal surgeon John Bradmore. James Wright has extensively researched what happened to Hal after the battle, and he is going to show me just how Bradmore went about operating on the prince.
So James, Prince Hal takes a massive wound at the Battle of Shrewsbury.
He does. He gets an arrow in the face.
What do we know about it?
Quite a lot, actually, because the surgeon that treated him afterwards, John Bradmore, was kind enough to leave a full account of the operation. So he takes us through the entire journey step by step.
So what do we know about the depth of this wound?
We know that it was 6 inches deep. Bradmore makes that very, very clear.
So now Shakespeare says this is a shallow scratch, is what he has Hal say.
Yeah.
This is not a shallow scratch.
This is not a shallow scratch. We can demonstrate exactly how not shallow this is.
Okay.
So this is going to be the prince for the day.
Okay.
So apologies, Your Highness. And if we can just get a nice demonstration of just roughly about there. And we're just going to give that a nice shove in, going down about 6 inches.
Oh.
That feels about right.
Oh, the poor man.
And it doesn't say exactly at what point the shaft was removed, but we do know that when it was removed...
Oh, God.
He's going to leave something behind.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. And this
That
is
is a problem.
Bradmore's problem.
This is
He's
Bradmore's problem.
pulled the shaft, the arrowhead is still left in there, and lodged against his spine.
Yeah.
To help us get a sense of the wound and the task facing Bradmore, we have this block of ballistics gel. Driving our arrow into it, we can see exactly the problem that Bradmore faced. But before we can even think about extracting this arrowhead, we first need to prepare the wound.
So his approach to this was to create what he called tents.
Tents.
So
Now, I've camped in a tent. This doesn't look like a tent.
No, it's not. This was his word for it, and it's essentially pith of elder, which does have some antibiotic properties, wrapped very tightly in linen, and then he would have dipped it in honey and rose water, which would have been an antiseptic. He wouldn't necessarily understand the mechanism, but he knows that that works. It prevents infections. So he's going to start off with quite a thin one, and what he's going to do is just very carefully ease that down. And you imagine he's doing this all by feel, of course, and we can see through the ballistic gel, he can't.
And this is several days after he's taken the wound, so it's this much more important that he open it up again.
Absolutely. So brings that out, and then we're just going to consider using wider ones.
And he would put these in and leave them in there for a little while and then pull them out?
Yeah, just widening it out a little bit. He's just giving himself that little bit more room to work with without doing much collateral damage around the area.
After days of preparing the wound, Bradmore could finally attempt his extraction of the arrowhead. Amazingly though, in order to perform the surgery, he first had to invent the tool for the job. Luckily for us, Bradmore not only left his incredibly detailed account, he also sketched the tool for us too, meaning that we can have a go at an extraction ourselves today.
So essentially he describes long, smooth tongs
Okay.
that have a screw mechanism of some kind inside that would work down the shaft and grip the arrowhead from the inside.
So you need to move the tongs outward to grip from the inside.
Exactly. And I do, as it happens, have a replica that has been made. So,
Look, I've read about these, but I've not seen one like this.
so this works remarkably like a wall plug. So this central shaft, as you can see, it's running down between the tongs. So as you tighten it down, it pushes the tongs apart and allows you to grip the arrowhead from the inside.
And that's part of why you have these grooves on the end, is to have that
Yeah,
grip.
it's just to increase that friction, yes.
Do you think this is actually going to work?
You can give it a go.
Let's give it a go. See if it works.
Okay. So I'm just going to feed that down. And if you actually read Bradmore's accounts, he says he's doing it entirely by feel. You know, there's no little electron microscopes or anything like that to sort of eat his way. He's got to just feel his way down there. And he says by his imagination, he's hit that point, which feels about right now. That feels like I'm hitting something solid. And then I'm just going to slowly
You can see as you're doing that, that is getting wider and it's getting that grip on the arrowhead in there. Just hoping the prince doesn't sneeze.
Okay. And then Bradmore describes that once it was in there, he then moved it slightly back and forth.
Oh, you can see it in there. I can't imagine the pain.
And very carefully.
Oh,
And there we go.
it worked. Saved the life of the prince.
Hal's recovery would be a long one, but the genius of Bradmore saved his life and changed the course of history too.
Hal surely would have been left with a sizable scar on his face from the injury, but no source has ever been found making reference to it. However, the scar on his cheek wouldn't be the only legacy that the Battle of Shrewsbury would leave on the young prince.
When we think about Henry V, it's usually 1415 and Agincourt that we think about his moment of glory, but I don't think you can understand Agincourt without understanding Shrewsbury 1403, right?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, look at the lessons he learns here. He learns the power of the longbow. I mean, they knew the power of the longbow, but in a new way, and he knows it personally. When he goes to Agincourt, he has a higher degree of bowmen per infantryman than any army before this. Wow. He took one in the face. He knows what these things can do. And that actually leads to something else that he does. He takes a full medical corps with him on the Agincourt campaign because he knows the power of medicine.
So in a way, Shrewsbury changes the whole approach technologically to the English going to fight in France, but it also sort of changes Henry's personal approach to battle as well, doesn't it? He becomes very bold, a risk taker, somebody who's going to take bold, aggressive, decisive action.
He absolutely is. I mean, and it paid off for him. And I think that the fact that it paid off and he survived this horrible thing he probably shouldn't have survived also affects him.
Well, it's incredible, isn't it? This wound that he takes in the face and the head should have killed him. It would have killed almost anybody, and yet it doesn't. And I think what you get with Henry for the rest of his life is this spiritual sense that God wanted him to live, and God wants him to do something amazing with his life, which, come on, he does.
Destiny. Headed to Agincourt.
So without Shrewsbury, Hal doesn't become Henry V.
That's right.
There can't be any Agincourt.
The Battle of Shrewsbury was a messy, bloody affair that paved the way for a critical founding myth of England.
But it also put the nation on a path to even greater tragedy. Less than 50 years later, the Lancastrian usurpation of the crown will be dragged up again as the country descended into the bitter chaos of the Wars of the Roses.
But despite the huge impact that the battle had on a national scale, at its heart, it was about two warring families, the Lancasters and the Percys. And this wouldn't be the end of either of their stories.
Rebellion would continue to flow through the blood of the Percys. Their descendants would take part in both the gunpowder plot and in the struggles against King Charles in the English Civil War.
But for the Lancastrians, their royal history was only just beginning. The Battle of Shrewsbury legitimised their usurpation of the crown, and it set Hal on his journey to becoming one of the greatest kings England ever had.